These are 3 absolutely beautiful clocks, and they're the result of putting over 10 hours of my woodworking skills to the test. Follow along this wood story to find out if you're a beginner, skilled, or master of the woodworking craft. This wood story begins with the design. To make the clocks, I utilized a few different templates that I cut using my laser. You can also buy these templates, or you can simply print and cut the shapes with a scissor and then use those to trace the wood. I'll put a link in the description below if you want to grab the templates from my website. So the idea here is that once you have your pieces, they're going to go into the shape and they're going to be in the order that we decided. But these are actually going to be replaced with the actual wood. So my next decision matrix is going to be to figure out, how do I want each one of these cuts to show up? And sometimes, it makes sense to put it one way versus another. So take your time figuring that one out. And also just making sure that you actually have the right width. So this one's a little bit narrow. So I'm going to probably use this one instead, because that will actually fit here on this piece of wood. So I'm going to be using this one there. And then I have to figure out what I want to do with that piece. Lots of decisions, lots of fun. I just realized that my walnut is just a hair too thick. It needs to be the exact same thickness. Otherwise, it's going to cause me issues later on. So I'm just going to go to a planer and make them the exact same size. As you just saw, my blade just broke. As I was cutting out this walnut shape here, it decided that it had enough. Which happens, but it sucks, because now I have to go get another blade because I don't have one. And that means that I will not be putting this in a resin today. Oh well. Gotta work on something else then. After quite a bit of stress trying to figure out my bandsaw with its blade breaking on me, I decided to try to use a jigsaw, but the only blade I have for my jigsaw currently is a pretty rough one, so that also didn't really work, just because I do have a couple of curves, particularly in this black walnut here, that I didn't want to risk not getting a good handle on. So what I instead decided to do was actually just put my resaw blade back on my bandsaw. And it's definitely not an ideal blade to be using for this kind of work. How I got around it was I left my tension a little bit looser than usual. And then what I did for a lot of the little curve parts, I cut in little by little in order to be able to get this curve. So it does mean I'm going to have a little bit more sanding work. I have a couple of options now. I can sand them the way they are, or I can attach my templates just because I have them, and then I can do the rest on the router. So I finished cutting, sanding, and wiping down all my pieces, and they're by no means perfect. They can be a little bit rough around the edges because we're adding epoxy that's going to be completely covered. I just want it to look really nice at the top of the surface, just in case we get to the point where the epoxy is going to go all the way up here. I want it to have a nice straight edge. Now that we have all these pieces in here, I want to secure them. And I think I'm going to use some double-sided tape and some sticks, just so that nothing is going to move around as I actually go ahead and pour this. All right, got my epoxy. See this. So the only thing I'm trying to achieve at this point is really just to add that initial layer that's going to hold everything together. And normally, like if you have deep pour epoxy, you could pour everything at once, but I don't. This is technically tabletop epoxy. So I do have to go in small increment, which works fine for me. I'm going to take my time and really make sure that hopefully we get bubbles and that it's all going to look great. So this now needs to sit for at least 4 hours before I can do the next coat. It's day 2. This has now gotten 2 pours. It's going to need a third, and it's cured in the shape that it's in. But I'm now going to go ahead and take off the supports, because before I do the third pour, I want to have these off so that they don't end up getting fused to the wood. The second clock is going to be more of a artistic clock, and we're not going to be using any resin for this one. So the idea here is that we have a half circle, and we're gonna cut that out with one type of wood. And then the second type of wood will also end up having a half circle. But before we do that, we're gonna cut it into little strips, and then afterwards we will cut out the shape so that this one will actually have a half circle, but there will be lines in between. I'll show you what it looks like as we get into it. But for now, I'm going to trace my half circle here, and then I will go over on the table saw and cut the walnut. And this is what it looks like after it's been cut. Now, my last cut didn't go through, but it doesn't matter because I'm way beyond the template. So it's actually just a kind of a nice indicator of how much the saw takes away, and I'll be able to use that as my spacing. To cut the pieces that are going in between the walnut, I used my leftover wormy maple wood and cut them into perfect strips using my bandsaw. And then I proceeded to glue them together. Here's a little trick for you. If you are doing a lot of gluing, then just use a little clamp here. Keep them together while you spread on that awesome glue. That will just make it a lot easier. Once the walnut and maple is fully dried, you can run it through your planer, but a word of caution, only remove 1/10 of an inch at each pass. It may take you a good 20 to 30 runs to get the board flat, but you don't want to risk any of your pieces chipping, so go slow. Rocket and I want to say a quick thank you for following along this WoodStory. Your support to my channel means the world to me. Your likes and your subscriptions means that I can continue doing what I want to do, which is share amazing projects that you can do yourself. And as something new, I have a brand new newsletter that's going out every single week. So if you want to learn some more tips and tricks and see the latest things that I've been up to, then check it out in the description below. For this clock, we're going to keep the design super simple. We're going to take our fun piece of wood, nice rustic piece, and then what we're going to do is we're going to router out the back side, and I'm going to use my little template here, and I'm going to put it on the wood where I want it. And then I'm going to mark it because this is actually my top part, but I want to have it from the back. This clock piece needs to go in the back, the mechanism. But it's going to be hard to figure out exactly where that is on the back side. So I'm going to mark it right here, that, and then I'm going to drill a hole through. And once that pilot hole has been drilled through, I'll be able to know exactly where that is on the back side so that I know what part to router out. Now, after I have my pilot hole, I can just use a Sharpie and mark that. And then I can put my template on top of it again so that I know where I'm routering out. And the process for routering out the back for the clock mechanism is exactly the same for all 3 clocks. While I had the template on the clock, I used it on my table router to make my clock perfectly round and remove any of the bandsaw burn marks. I also used a round-over bit on my table router to smooth the edges. With the backside routered for the clock mechanism, I made a mark where the clock is going to go through the wood using my template. I first drilled a pilot hole, and then I increased my drill bit until the hole was big enough for the clock part to go through the wood. I also used painter's tape to limit tear out when drilling through the wood. This was done for all 3 clocks. I also sanded all 3 clocks to 220 grit, and I made sure to water pop it before its final coat to raise the grains and ensure a super smooth surface. The clocks are starting to look great. The shape have come along, and it's time for some of the final touches. And there's a few options here. So in my case, I've decided that I'm going to do a combination between laser engraving and outlining. However, if you do not have a laser, it is not an issue at all, because when you purchase your clock hardware, it also comes with the little numbers that you can use for your clock. And of course, this is optional. If you want to leave it without anything, you do you. You want to do something funny, do that. But just know that you can absolutely just use the ones that the package come with as well. You don't have to use a laser. I finished the clocks using walrus oil and walrus wax. The oil really brings out the color of the wood, and the wax gives it an extra layer of protection. You can also use shellac, a polycoat, or even a layer resin. Installing the clock mechanism was quick and easy. There are many clock hands included in the package, which allowed me to further play with the final design. I, however, was not impressed with how delicate the clock hands are. They easily bend when installing them, so if you are using the same ones as I am, be very careful upon installation. The clocks turned out great. I really love the beginner clock with its simple design, and I even added a little bit of extra fun to it in case I ever forget that it's 5 o'clock. The skilled clock that utilized resin is a great project to use up scrap wood, and the contrasting colors between the black, walnut, and wormy maple turned out great. And finally, the master clock may just be my favorite because of its symmetry, which highlights how awesome woodworking is when you combine nature with power tools. And honestly, it's a great next step project for anyone who's ready to level up. So tell me in the comments, are you a beginner, skilled, or a master woodworker? And which clock is your favorite? And if you'd like this video, make sure to check out how I turned my pile of scrap wood into this amazing art display. I'll see you soon in the next Wood Story.